I would like to really start with session one, which is Bristol's immediate response to COVID-19 lockdown 1.0, bearing in mind we're now in 3. I think we had better label that one rather than anything else. And it's really what kind of helped the immediate response that was needed from the city across a number of areas, really, from that. I'm going to leave the speakers to really introduce themselves, particularly because I think it's going to be easier for them to do so. But they are actually Pete Godden from Family Action and Food Clubs, which expanded rapidly during that time. Kirsty Wilson, Playful, Bristol Children's Scrap Store, who kind of the realization that it wasn't just food, it was actually activities as well and how they could be linked. And then Kat Caldwell from Caring Bristol around the Cheers Drive project. So I shall leave them to take over. They're doing their own screen sharing, so let them set up. Pete, over to you.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. I hope you can all hear me. Let me just go to sharing my screen. Okay, are we there? Can everyone see that? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so my name is Pete Godden. Thank you for the introduction, Christine. As you said, I work for Family Action, and I'm the regional coordinator for the food clubs, so that oversees the south of the UK. I'll be talking a little bit about the context of what the food clubs do and how we expanded quite rapidly across the city in 2020. So first off, what is a food club? Now, I think it's just really quickly, I'll run through some of this just to explain how it works. So the aim of food club is to help free up people's budgets. It's not free food provision, but people actually pay £3.50 a week. Now, for that for that £3.50, they get up to £15 worth of food. The majority, about 95% of the food, is from a fair share. So we get a fantastic variety of food: fresh meat, fresh vegetables, dairy, bakery. By engaging on the scheme, families can save up to £600 a year. So they're paying their £3.50 a week and they get up to £15. This obviously enables them to free up their budgets for other essential costs. Maybe it's clothing or heating or whatever it might be. Really key to the food clubs is the fact that we're promoting healthy eating. We're trying to get people to engage with cooking from raw ingredients and actually trying new foods. The majority of the food clubs to start with were located in children's centres. They've since expanded from that into other community buildings as well. But I think it's key that also the food clubs are an avenue for people to access other services. Each food club can have up to 50 members, and they're open to families that live or work within 15 minutes. As I mentioned before, now key to the food clubs is the fact that we're trying to get people to develop their cookery skills and actually to try new ingredients and engage with new foods. We work very closely with the Children's Kitchen, Joe Ingleby, who I know is talking later as well. And they've been delivering, and also 91 Ways as well. And they've been delivering cookery demos and cookery lessons at the clubs. What's been obviously tricky is the COVID situation and having to very quickly adapt. Now, Jo and her team are fantastic at always changing their methods to make sure that they're safe and secure, but that people are still, exploring new foods and building their knowledge of food. Absolutely fundamental to the success of the food clubs has been the partnership work. Now, they're administered and primarily funded by Family Action, who I work for, but there's also a very strong connection with FareShare, which is where we get the food, from Bristol City Council, of the use of their buildings and their staff as well, especially in the children's centres, and also some funding through DEFRA this year. Feeding Bristol, the strategic overview, and also support and alongside. We work with a huge host of other partner organisations, which I'm probably not going to list all of them. But for example, the Bench up in Lockleys, where we run a food club, the Innscourt Community Centre in Knowle West, Connaught School, Square Food Foundation. The community farm have provided us with additional produce during the year, and obviously, of course, feeding Britain as well, who's provided us with help and support. Very quickly, before I run into sort of how we responded to COVID, I'll just give you a really quick background to it. So we launched back in summer 2019 with just the 2 clubs after a successful pilot scheme up in Manchester. The 2 there were the Hartcliffe Children's Centre and the Southmead Children's Centre. Our sort of plan for the next year was to identify partners and open probably 1 a month, if that, but to gradually, slowly expand the programme. So by the time we got to February in 2020, we had 5 clubs in total, and we were supporting about 100 families. Now, obviously then, when we came to March, we had the situation of the lockdown and the COVID situation. So what happened is we sort of called an emergency meeting between ourselves, Feeding Bristol, the children's centres, and FareShare, and we sort of looked at how we could rapidly expand the programme to support more people during this time. So our sort of long-term view of having 10 open by the end of the year changed very rapidly, and I think we opened 5 food clubs within a couple of months, and then we opened another 5 in the following months. So we opened a lot in East Bristol, which we didn't have any food clubs to start with. So we opened with the children's centres across there. We opened some in the south of Bristol, some more in the south of Bristol, again with the children's centres, and also some community centres. We then also opened for a second day a week up in Lockleys as well, up in North Bristol. So all in all, by the end of August, we were actually supporting up to about 420 members a week across the 15 locations, which was a 250% increase. Now, obviously, this is this sort of nitty-gritty, slightly boring a bit with the adaptation to lockdown. Now, we're all sick to death of wearing masks and PPE and all that sort of thing, but obviously it is absolutely crucial. We didn't want to stop any of our services, and we had to make sure it was safe for all. So we changed our processes quite considerably. We used to operate a lot more like a shop, so people would come in and it was very much get hands on, and we'd encourage people to spend as long as they could in the food clubs. Unfortunately, we had to take that a lot away. We had to operate from doorways. We had to give people time slots. Obviously, all the staff had to wear a lot of PPE, and there was a lot more pre-packing boxes. But what was crucial is we still gave people an element of choice. We made sure that there was still, it wasn't just this is your box for the week, but actually there was definitely an element of choice. I think what was key is that we didn't close for any of those sessions. Now, that is really sort of because of the dedication of not only our staff but also our partner staff, who really, we wouldn't have been able to do it without, and also the huge amount of volunteers that work across the city. I think that was key because the food clubs, especially during the first lockdown, were a real key lifeline for families, and I think they gave people a chance to see a friendly face every week, a chance to get out of their houses. Obviously, the food was key, but also the other services alongside that the children's centres or community centres could provide were also really key at this time. The picture there actually has got nothing to do with lockdown. It's just because I didn't want to put a picture of PPE up because I thought it'd be a bit dull. So actually, that's just a picture of the community growing at Stockwood, and it just shows a really nice joined up approach where they grow additional produce that's also for sale at the food clubs. Now, what became quite apparent, and again, this is from working strategically across the city through the Feeding Bristol, is that the food clubs could be a real key distribution point for other services, not just food. So we worked really closely with people such as the Scrap Store and Children's Kitchen and all sorts of different organisations that actually deliver additional products, and that these were really key to the families. And I think they provided an extra sort of element to it. I'm not going to go too much into detail about this because I think that I think Kirsty might be talking about this a little bit in a minute. But it's just sort of identifying that the logistics were built there for the food clubs, and actually it could be used as an avenue to distribute other things. So just to summarise what we sort of did from March to August, we increased the number of food clubs very rapidly from 5 to 15 in the 6 months. We increased the weekly membership from 120 to 420. Now that does fluctuate depending on many different things. It's actually up to over 550 around about now. The staffing, so to start with, it was just myself and Simon Green. We were the 2 part-time members of staff. By the end of the year, we'd got up to 7 part-time staff, the equivalent of 4 full-time staff. As I've mentioned before, we've built incredibly strong partnerships across the city, which means that the network is really robust. And I think that it will, we aren't just here as a response to COVID. The food clubs were around before, and they will be around for, for as long as the situation is they're needed. But I think that partnership has just been key to the success. In terms of distribution, now Fair Share never shy to a challenge. Every time we said we'd open a new club, they said that's absolutely brilliant. Like, we've got the food. So we went from distributing 1 ton a week in March to over 3 tons a week in August. So finally, a couple more quick slides. We've also got 3 clubs that are in Bath and North East Somerset, and we have a club in South Gloucester as well. Now, these are some stats of what we've achieved over the whole year. You can see that collectively it's quite an epic amount of food that's been distributed. The total bags, that's actually how many people have collected. It's not actual bags, it's how many people have collected food over the year. So that's those 400 odd members each week. The amount of savings that collectively the families have saved, so that's by paying the £3.50 a week and getting up to £15 worth of food, and the CO2 that's been saved from rediverting food from landfill. Just to put some context, I think this is quite important. So the success of the programme in Bristol and also in Manchester, where it also started, has meant that we've managed to secure funding to develop it across the country, because we've sort of because we worked out the processes quite keenly and worked out that that it can work and it has a real place in food provision. We've managed to roll it out into other settings across the country. Now, again, that's thanks to support from people like Feeding Britain. But we now, from having 8 clubs across the country in Manchester and Bristol in February, we've now got 42 across the country, and we've got another 36 due to open. Now, lockdown part 3 is going to throw up some new challenges to that, but I'm confident that we will get there. And just a final slide. This is actually taken from a food club which was just before Christmas in St Paul's, and it's just a little bit of member feedback, really. I mean, this could be taken from other food clubs, but it just shows what the clubs really mean to people. I'm not going to read through them all, but I just think one that really touched me was, I came for the food and I now come for support. I think that's really sort of key, is that the food is only part of the picture, really, of what the food clubs do. So that's the end of that for me. But there will be a little bit of time, I think, at the end of the 3 presentations if anyone wanted to ask any questions, but I just wanted to thank you all for listening. Okay.
Great, thank you. And over to Kirsty with the microphone on.
Okay, hopefully you can all see those slides. Okay, so my name is Kirsty Wilson. I am the Deputy CEO at Children's Scrap Store and the co-coordinator of Playful Bristol. I'd like to thank Feeding Bristol for asking us to speak today, but also for the ability to collaborate with them all year, because working with them allows us to achieve really amazing differences for a lot of families that we work with throughout the year. I'm just going to quickly run through, there we go. I'm just going to quickly run through what Playful Bristol is, because I think it's quite a new setup and perhaps not everybody will know. But it's a consortium of the 10 leading play organisations in the city, including LPW, Band, the Adventure Playgrounds, Playing Out, and Imela. And the aim is to increase the quantity and quality of play opportunities across the city, and that having no impact on where children live, there to be free and unstructured play opportunities across the city. And one of the things we do, most importantly, I think, is advocate and educate about the nature of play and its importance in a healthy childhood. Anybody who doesn't know about Scrap Store, we are a Bristol-based reuse charity, and we collect business waste. There's a picture of our warehouse, and make it available for groups who work with children, young people and adults with the aim of improving arts, craft and play. But we actually do a lot of sort of infrastructure type work because we're quite well placed to do so. So just getting into what we've done in that sort of initial period, sort of lockdown one, and how we worked. It became really apparent really quickly that there was going to be a massive need for resources for children. We were getting phone calls from head teachers saying, I've got children at home who don't have pens and pencils. How are families going to survive kind of being locked down in their house without things for their children to do? And like Pete said, it became really apparent very early on that the food clubs were going to be a really good distribution mechanism. People were already going there. It wasn't an additional journey. And so we quite quickly got 250 packs out to the initial food clubs. And then, like Pete said, they developed a whole load of extra food clubs. So then we had to do another 320 packs in order to deal with the extra food clubs. And there are some pictures of the sorts of things that were going on. We had an amazing response to the request to ask people to volunteer, which made it all possible, really. And I think, like we talked about collaboration quite a lot this morning, but it was also businesses in Bristol who were donating bags or cardboard boxes, which make those things possible to do. So that sort of all happened before the summer holidays. And then the summer holidays, everything got a little bit more ramped up because there was going to be no school provision for children and young people. And so we needed to find different ways of accessing and supporting as many people as needed it in the city. We were also really aware that for some children, having a session which had to be run in a really different way due to COVID restrictions was going to be a lifeline. That opportunity to get out and play was going to be really important. So we worked with 25 different organisations in order to work out what their capacity was and what we could do over the summer. That was quite challenging because the restrictions weren't, or the regulations weren't published until I think it was the 5th of July, with the summer holidays starting on the 17th. So that was all a little bit tricky, but it was an amazing response from everybody. The other thing that happened was we set up kind of informal food distribution points where activity packs were also distributed. So they would typically be one of the Playful Bristol organisations, LPW or Children's Scrap Store, turning up somewhere in a van where people knew we were going to be, with a really simple referral process. And that just meant people who perhaps didn't want to enter into a system or really felt like the more kind of statutory support processes weren't really for them could turn up with no questions asked and be given an activity pack for their children and a food parcel. And what was really nice about that was it's a really nice way of supporting people in terms of, you know, come and get an activity pack for your children and then here's some food if you want it. I think during the summer, for some adults, we were possibly the only other adult they were speaking to all week. And like Pete said, it kind of, the starting point is the food and the activity packs. But the reality is the thing that was probably most valuable for some of those adults was kind of 10 minutes chatting to somebody who would listen, to the point where, you know, we changed our staffing around to make sure that we had appropriate staff and volunteers who had kind of the time to do that. We also were making food parcels, so Fair Share were brilliant and they delivered us food every week, which got turned into parcels for that distribution. We learned an awful lot about food as play organisations. That's not something that we predominantly do, but it made a real difference. And the other thing that happened in the summer was, I don't know whose idea it was. I think it was somebody in Feeding Bristol's idea, that we made 750 packs a week and distributed them through the food clubs and the play organisations and these informal distribution points. And where that became slightly more comical was there were 4 organisations involved in making the activity packs. So we ended up with a small army of volunteers picking things up from one place and dropping it to another in a COVID secure way, which was no mean feat, I have to say. We're incredibly grateful for the corporate volunteers and the people who just phoned up and said, hey, I can help. There's sort of some pictures that give you an idea of how it went. So this is one of our offices being turned into a food packing station, and there were just boxes and boxes and crates everywhere. But the difference it made was huge. So if you just look at the figures, and that was all possible because of that collaboration with those partners and Feeding Bristol. But I think the things that really kind of stuck with me was there's a lot of importance in quite small detail. So knowing that a child is left-handed, so they get given left-handed scissors, or knowing that one of the children in that family is a vegetarian, so they need a slightly different option, they make a really big difference to people. And systems need to be really, really easy. There's already so much kind of stress and complication in people's life. You need to be at the right place at the right time, and you need to be consistent with that communication and not changing what you're doing so that families can kind of know what's happened and rely on certain bits and pieces. There was a lot of learning around how things are physically transported. We started off putting stuff in boxes, and I'm sure the food club had a similar experience where you hand a box to a mother with a pushchair. What are they going to do with it? And you'll see in the first pictures, the packs were actually really quite big, and it was really interesting getting the feedback that was great, but how do I get it home? So the weight of things, the size of things, how things are stored makes a huge difference to individuals involved. And again, thinking about that choice and giving people as much choice as possible in a COVID secure way is really important. One of the things that really stuck with me over the summer was when one of my colleagues came back and said, I've got a group of parents who they're just not taking food. I'd like them to take a bit more food really each week. And so the next week they set up a shop with the children in the play session, and the children were kind of playing with that idea of the food, and children are really powerful in influencing adults' decisions in terms of, children suddenly see spaghetti rather than pasta, and they're like, oh, we've never had that one before, can we have that one, mum. And actually that will impact kind of adults' choices about what they might be prepared to do and how they're going to do it. And there were little things that quite a lot of our staff did which really made a difference. So our staff would do things like say, oh, I saw butternut squash was in this week. Here, I've printed some butternut squash recipes for families, because I don't think the families that I'm working with will perhaps be confident with butternut squash. And so there were lots of like little add-on bits and pieces that happened throughout the year. And I think one of the other things that was really important to recognise was people needed time. Families needed time, children needed time, but so did staff and volunteers. I think a lot of people learned a lot of things, and one of the things that was most noticeable to me was when I asked staff about what they learned, most of them started with things they learned personally rather than things which they had learned for work. And I think this summer was a real summer of learning for a lot of people. So if anybody wants any further information or more information on the Playful Bristol strategy, there's a link for you, and I'm assuming the slides will get sent out But there are my contact details, and feel free to give me a call if you want more information about how kind of activity and play kind of goes alongside food and supporting families. Thank you.
Thanks, Kirsty. That's absolutely great. Moving on to Kat Caldwell.
Hi, morning everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I'll just get the presentation up. Can everyone see the presentation okay? Yeah, great. Just get my notes up. So, my name's Kat. I'm one of the operations managers at Caring in Bristol. So we've just heard from Pete and Kirsty there about all the amazing work that's going on for food clubs and supporting families throughout the crisis. But I'm going to talk to you a bit now about what was going on in the homelessness sector. So Caring in Bristol, we run a bunch of different services and projects supporting people experiencing homelessness across the city. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about what's going on in the sector and our response to the pandemic, which was Cheers Drive. So, next slide. Sure, is this working properly? Can people see the slides okay? Yeah, great.
You're not in presentation mode though, you're just in your ordinary.
No, okay.
So if you, yeah.
Great, okay. So in terms of what was going on before COVID, within the food provision in the homelessness sector, there was a lot of services going on, a lot of provision for people. So you had a number of kind of established organisations that were providing food in communal settings, so social eating, places like the Wild Goose, Julian Trust, been going for a number of years. Anyone could turn up, get free food, and that was home cooked food, and then sit down together and eat together. And in addition to that, you also, in recent years, we've seen popping up lots of different smaller groups, kind of really grassroots organisations that were providing food, and they were going out and about to where people were in order to provide food for people on the streets. And the backdrop to that, which is the graph you can see on the screen now, is a very kind of steady and visible increase in terms of the number of people rough sleeping in Bristol. So in 2019, it was around 100 people per the official rough sleep account. In reality, that number's kind of more like double that, but really the people sleeping rough is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of homelessness. So about 200 people sleeping rough, but then there's almost 3,000 people who are technically homeless in Bristol. So that includes people in night shelters, in temporary accommodation, and in supported housing places as well. So there was a lot of support for people in Bristol, particularly around food, who were homeless, but as you can see, there's been a real increase in the number of people needing that support. Then in terms of what happened in March and getting Cheers Drive set up, there were three things that were kind of key to the whole process, really. So the first thing that happened, and this kind of all happened over the space of 2 or 3 weeks, I guess, from sort of mid to end of March. So the first thing was that a number of people who were homeless were moved into hotel rooms. And this was the result of a government mandate. So the government said that local councils had to kind of scoop up everyone who was sleeping rough, who was in night shelters and dormitories, and place them into self-contained accommodation where they could kind of isolate and be safe during the lockdown. So that was the first thing that happened. The other thing was those communal food services that I talked about, and a lot of the pop-up stuff as well, had to close. So it was no longer safe to operate communal eating. So those places had to close. And a number of the pop-up services either reduced or kind of stopped initially because people gathering in big groups outside also wasn't allowed. And the third thing that happened then was restaurants across the city were forced to close as well. So I think what the kind of need that there was and the solution really to that became clear. We had people in hotel rooms where they were safe, but they had no cooking facilities, and they also couldn't access the usual food services that they did. And you also had a bunch of empty restaurants, empty kitchens, and chefs that had been furloughed across the city. And so that's where Caring in Bristol came in. Prior to COVID, we actually weren't really involved in food provision for homeless people. We ran a bunch of other different projects, but that's not something we did. But what we did have was connections with the hospitality sector. So Josh Eggleton had been involved with our Caring at Christmas project for the previous couple of years. And what we also had was access to volunteers. We had a huge kind of volunteering database from our Christmas project, from our night shelter work. And we also had relationships with people in the sector, so the council, with St Mungo's, and with the other food providers. So it felt like we were, even it wasn't an area we were involved in before, that it just seemed like we were in a real good position to step in and kind of meet the need that was there. So we started delivering food on the 25th of March. And that was about 80 people who'd been put into hotels at that point, and from Salt and Malt they cooked up all the kind of leftover fish and chips and sent that out. And then by the following Monday, so 5 days later, we were operating across 3 separate kitchens, and we were providing 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunch and dinner, to kind of 200 people at that point that were in the hotels. And that kind of increased to 300 people over the following week or so. Yeah, so that was how it started. It was kind of a huge initial push and set up really quickly, and then continued for the next 3 months. So in terms of where the food was coming from, we were working with Fair Share, kind of getting as much as we could from them. Bristol Food Union were really instrumental, so they set up in March. Josh was one of the founders of that. And they did a huge amount of work kind of moving food around the city. All the restaurants that had closed had leftover stock, and that was redistributed to organisations and projects like Cheers Drive to use. We also were getting a weekly donation from Total Produce, loads of fruit and veg, as well as they lent us 2 chilled vans, which we needed for the Fair Share collections. And then, yeah, just a bunch of other restaurants really that were kind of donating stuff to us. And whatever else we needed, we were purchasing from local suppliers to try and kind of support them. So see, they were suffering from the knock-on effects of restaurants being closed. And then in terms of the kind of various partners, I think similar to what Kirsty and Pete have said, the collaboration across all the different partners was really key to making this a success. So in terms of the catering, we were working with obviously Josh and his teams at the Pony and Trap at Salt and Malt. We also then had Emmeline and Pasta Loco and Bianchi's involved, and we were using their kitchens. So that's the kind of catering side of it. In terms of the sort of admin side of it, I guess we were working with the council, St Mungo's, Golden Key. So they were really the ones putting in place the accommodation for people, and then we were working with them to manage the list of beneficiaries. So it was 300 people a day in hotels, but actually that was a transient population. So it was about 700 people in total over the period. So it was a huge job kind of keeping track of where people were, their dietary requirements, language barriers, all that sort of stuff. So the catering, the admin side of it, then the volunteers were the other kind of key people that were involved. So we had about 150 active volunteers, and they were collecting food, delivering it. They were going door to door in the hotels to deliver food to people and kind of check in on people, how they were. And that kind of connection, that social interaction was really important as well. A lot of people weren't seeing very many people in that period. And they were also, packing all the bags, cleaning, the kind of dedication we had from our volunteers. And it was lots of existing volunteers, but lots of new people as well that got involved. It was just incredible. And then the final part was the kind of collaboration with other providers in the sector. So Julian Trust let us use their building and their kitchen, and then they worked with other groups, including Bosch, Feed the Homeless, Roots, to run an operation in Champion Square that was ensuring that anyone who was still sleeping rough got food. So we're providing another 100 meals a day that they were then distributing from there each evening. And then the other thing to mention is just our funders. So it was really important to us from the beginning that we tried to support our community as well. We've had so much support from the hospitality sector in particular. It's keen that we didn't sort of take advantage of the fact that they were, in such a difficult position. So we didn't have any funding. This is a completely new project. We had no funding in March, but we had strong financial reserves and a board of directors that said, this is what we need to do, just go for it. And then our income generation team set about finding funding, and our funders were amazing. We were able to repurpose existing grants. We got new grants from DEFRA, from Big Lottery, from Quartet. And we also ran some successful fundraising campaigns. So the general public have been incredibly generous. And all of that's meant that we've been able to support local suppliers, buying produce from them. And also all of our chefs, luckily, most of them were furloughed, so were volunteering for us, and we couldn't have operated at the scale we did without that. But we were able to pay any chefs that weren't furloughed, self-employed people that kind of fell through the cracks of the government support. So there's a few key stats then about what we delivered over the first 3 months. So we were feeding 400 people a day at its kind of peak, and that was breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So up to 1,200 meals going out every day. We supported a total of 716 people, delivered 80,000 meals, and that was our volunteers contributed over 9,000 hours. We had 25 chefs and 14 restaurants involved. So a huge kind of collaborative effort. And in terms of what we learned, what the challenges were, the surprises, things we would have done differently. I think the one thing we found, especially looking back now, is that we were so lucky in those early months. Actually, the number of cases in Bristol was really low. So we had kind of contingency plans in place for our operations being disrupted, with staff and kitchen teams having to isolate, but that just really didn't happen. And so that was really lucky. And I guess another thing was just the scale of it, and the kind of how difficult it would be to run this operationally. We really underestimated that, I think. We set it up so quickly, and trying to kind of tweak systems and processes to an operation when you're delivering so much every single day. It was a 7-day-a-week operation for those 3 months. That's really difficult. So I think in hindsight, maybe we would have done a bit more planning before setting up, but I think at the time it just really felt like a crisis, and it didn't seem like an option to sit down and plan things for a week. And what it really showed was just how incredibly resilient people are, and dedicated. I think anyone who's worked with Josh Eggleton will know that kind of the energy that he has, and just the belief that you can achieve anything really, was key to this. And the network of people that he brought in, and just that kept everyone going, I think, at points.
Almost there, Kirsty.
Cool. So yeah, just quickly, I wanted to mention, in terms of what we've learned as well, the importance of food. This is a new area of work for us, but one we definitely want to continue working in. And it's easy to think of food as just being, a basic essential need that needs to be met. But actually, what we found for our clients in particular, it makes such a difference in kind of removing one anxiety that they have to deal with. Our beneficiaries have quite complex situations, a lot of them. Where they're going to get their food from is really, a crucial thing. And by removing the concern about that, it enables them to concentrate on different things. We were supporting people who were detoxing during the lockdown, and there were some really amazing results as a result of our work. So yeah, something that we plan to keep doing. So yeah, that's it for me.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, just amazing that the city response, and I think the three speakers really sort of just shown how much the city did pull together, and different organisations coming together, just absolutely astounding. To kind of back that up to a certain extent, we have another video made in conjunction with Bristol City Council. It's commonly known as the Milan Pact video, a shorthand. It has now been sent to the Milan Urban Food Pact. People will be shown internationally, actually, and just kind of how we responded as a city, as a one city response. So some of the people who we couldn't get to speak today are actually featured in that. So that's quite cool. So yep, the Tech Guys next one city video, please.
We've always known that there were cracks in our food system. What COVID did was it ripped open those cracks much more in a way that needed initial crisis management.
So we were aiming to become a sustainable food city by 2020.
Which is the first step in putting us on a pathway to making sure that everyone across the city has access to sustainable, nutritious food.
COVID then hit, but it hasn't derailed us and has refocused our efforts.
We made space for a whole range of organisations in Bristol who wanted to tackle hunger, nutritional poverty, looking at the whole food system, and ultimately formed the real backbone of our food effort around COVID.
The Cheers Drive project came out of a collaboration between chefs who no longer had a business that was available for them to work in, and Caring in Bristol, which was an organisation that was working within the homeless sector already.
The council was working on an initiative to put people who were experiencing homelessness into hotel accommodation. It just became kind of clear, I guess, that people were going to need to have food delivered to them.
The first thing that happened was we went to one of my restaurants, which was a fish and chip shop, and we cooked all the fish and chips that was in there because we couldn't open. And we served everyone fish and chips. We then went to the next restaurant. We just immediately soaked up all the food that was left over, and then we used that restaurant to be a permanent kitchen. That immediate mobilisation happened, and then we put a more permanent structure in place by creating 2 more kitchens, creating a rota system, and just making it happen very quickly.
Lots of Bristol's top restaurants and chefs got involved every day cooking food for up to 400 people. That was breakfast, lunch and dinner. And then we had a group of distribution volunteers that would come collect the food, take it to the various sites and then deliver it door to door to people in the hotels.
And over the 6-month period, we made about 140,000 plus meals. We would use surplus food from Fair Share. We also support our supply chain as well. But the most important thing was that it was a nutritious meal. You know, it was healthy, nutritious and delicious.
We looked at the assets in the city and we made a map of all food provision across the city. So to identify and understand what to build on, but also to connect it together. So connecting organizations who work strategically, such as Feeding Bristol, into organizations who are really grassroots. One of the things we worked really strategically in the council is to identify gaps in food provision in the city. The key gap is the culturally appropriate food. So we have to work with organizations like Muslim for Bristol.
People receive food, but it's not the right kind of food that they eat. What our job was to top up this and make it like halal or things that they consume daily.
People from different parts of the city, organizations, community groups, individuals, we all work together to support the vulnerable members of our community.
Well, I mean, we had local people who wanted to cook. We had taxi drivers who wanted to actually distribute the food. We had asylum seekers who had no money to give, but they wanted to help in their own way. We gave them the ingredients, you know, from the money that had been donated, and they were able to contribute.
In each area, in each neighborhood, we identify an organization or a community center to be our community hub. Through that, we can distribute food and also bring volunteers together to help. And it was a fantastic opportunity to work with local organizations who are providing food.
Food clubs are a way of providing affordable food for families. So we take food from Fair Share, convert it into a pantry-style model, so people will come and collect a bag of food each week.
Families join, they only have to pay £3.50 a week, for which they get about £20 worth of good food.
Transaction is really important to us. It provides that financial sustainability for the model, but it also empowers our members, and that gives a bit of dignity to people as well. It destigmatizes the fact that obviously this food is surplus from the industry, and it starts a conversation about budgeting and healthy eating. When COVID hit, we had to think strategically, and so we were able to work with Fair Share, Feeding Bristol and Feeding Britain, and rapidly expand the amount of food clubs we had from 5 right through to 14 here in Bristol. And we're engaging with almost 400 families, and we're distributing almost 3 tons of food a week.
What was great about it was the way that they were engaging with people to teach them about the food that they were selling to them.
We really benefited from all the investment that we'd already put into relationships in the city. All the work we'd done on writing the One City plan, developing that culture of collaboration.
I am still in awe of the citizens of Bristol.
The generosity that has been shown from our trade, I think, is incredible.
The greatest success is bringing people together.
And it was such a great honour for all those who were involved.
We have seen collaboration on a scale we've never seen. We have seen a generosity of spirit across the whole of the city. We have seen a Herculean effort around feeding the city and feeding those who are at disadvantage. We have seen One City and the One City approach in action, and it's been amazing to see.
It has indeed. Thank you for that. Thank you to our speakers. They've been absolutely incredible. I think if you haven't read the comments yet in the chat box, then please do. It's very inspiring, and how people have been moved by it, and actually just how Bristol moved together. It's been amazing. As happens with most conferences, we've actually kind of run out of time for questions. There's only been a couple in the chat box anyway. One is around whether the slides will be available after this, and yes, we're hoping that they will be. I'll gather them in from the speakers. And secondly, how do people get involved in the food clubs? So if Pete or Simon could kind of scroll back through that bit of the chat and just answer that question, that'd be great. There's not much else. So yes, thank you once again. Yeah, very insightful, very lovely, but also very realistic, as was the request, I think. That, yeah, perfect. Thank you. We're now